Hi everyone. Thank you for joining to us today's Sunday morning, afternoon, evening for the book launch of the paperback edition of the Bloomsbury Handbook to Sylvia Plath. This is, I think, a really great collection of essays, chapters that unfortunately came out a month after I submitted my PhD thesis. So I could not incorporate those wonderful pieces into my PhD thesis, but I will do that with my book. So we have here all the editors of the book, and we have guest presenters who are going to talk a little bit about. Amanda or Julie, do you want to say some words as well?
I'll go after Anita. Anita, you go first.
Okay.
No, you just haven't prepared anything. So yeah, exactly like Dorca. And unlike Dorca, I had the chance to be able to include some pieces of these essays into my book, and it really made a huge difference because it made me reconsider a lot of aspects of Plath's life or work that I was not aware of, or I was not particularly familiar with, especially, for example, the chapters about Plath and racism. There are loads of things, which did not fit into my PhD, but helped me a lot as a scholar. So that's why I'm so excited that the book now is available as a paperback, because it's going to reach other readers now. So Amanda, do you want to say anything?
Anita will go first, then me.
Okay, well, I'm Anita Helle, zooming in here from Portland, Oregon, with its Arctic air. And it's really been my pleasure to co-edit this Bloomsbury Handbook with two wonderful co-editors, Amanda Golden and Maeve O'Brien. This is the fourth Plath collection I've been part of in some way as an editor or a contributor. And it's really been the most joyful experience of any of them, thanks to our collaboration. We all got each other through COVID, many Zooms like this to produce this book. Just want to note that today it's really fitting that our Zoom has a distinctly transatlantic cast. There it is, the bell jar, because on June 14th of 1963, over 60 years ago, the first edition of the bell jar was published in England under Plath's pseudonym, Victoria Lucas. Plath actually received the proof copy for the book in December. I was 62. And after that, she wrote in her journal, "It is so funny and so good. May we all be funny and good." I look forward to our discussion. As Julie said, our excitement about the paperback, which is really the same book, a little bit of a wider format, a few essential corrections, but not just really minor ones, for $39 rather than the $175 prohibitive cost of a hardback. And so we really hope that this paperback will be accessible to wider audiences around the world who are writing and reading in English. Our contributors here today too are zooming in from far and near. Those of you here from Macedonia, Hebden, Brazil, and points beyond. For speakers representing different chapters of the book, we have Catherine Robinson from Cambridge, UK, Elizabeth Donaldson zooming from, I take it, Arizona, and Peter K. Steinberg from Massachusetts. Amanda will be introducing the contributors in a moment. Huge thanks to Dorca Tomas, the Plath Society, Julie Irigaray, and the University of Exeter for hosting. I met Dorca for the first time at the American Lit meeting in Boston last year. We were at the Ritz where Sexton and Plath did a lot of their post-workshop drinking. And Dorca was doing research for her really exciting work on Plath and the supernatural. If you haven't done so, I just want to put in a plug for Dorca's Plath Festival website, plathfest.co.uk. It's really rich in material, culture, events, activities. And Julie, it should be noted, is the author of some really groundbreaking work on Plath in France, influences, intertextualities, and so on. You can read an essay on Plath and France and French connections that she's written through her website. So do look at her website if you're interested. Just a few words in beginning here about our foundational intentions for the book. Our stepping off point was the 2017 Belfast conference. Some of you were there, letters, words, and fragments. And then it took several years and several iterations to discover and sharpen our focus. We were encouraged by Bloomsbury to do a more expansive book than we really had ever envisioned. I always envisioned collections as having 12 to 16 essays. They really wanted 26, and oh, I'm so glad we had that room to include many different pieces that we hadn't originally envisioned and to work across genres and generations. One of our intentions, a primary intention, was to recognize the immense consequential influence of Plath's 2-volume letters edited by Peter K. Steinberg and Karen Coquille. With Plath, as you know, there is always new archival work out there. The letters served as a kind of matrix for the topics that we developed in the organization of the book, because it cross-references so much of her life and work and gives us new pathways to follow. My introductory essay on the evolution of Plath's archive attempts to provide a kind of synoptic history of the evolution of her archive, and at the same time, to set some agendas for 21st century Plath scholarship. Plath studies is often focused on the bell jar in her poetry, but we wanted to recognize her writing in multiple genres, from autobiography to children's literature, to recognize the way she drew on popular culture. So there are essays on Plath, food, fashion, her writing for children, among others. Another area cross-referenced and immeasurably enlarged through the letters is our understanding of intertextualities and networks that Plath shared with other writers. These essays just taught me a lot about what was new in Plath's connections and networking circles. There are essays on Edith Sitwell, Ruth Fainlight, as well as on Ted Hughes and the ways that Plath drew on classical mythology. Yet another aim was to build out Plath's connections to modern media and technology. This is an area of considerable interest in modernist cultural studies. So there are 2 essays on Plath's immersion in the BBC, both drawing on new material in Plath's archives. There's a chapter on Plath and popular radio and television programs of her era. And in that section, we also incorporated new takes on media and pedagogy, which look at different ways that Plath and technologies and media are used in the classroom, from the service learning exhibits that Julie Goodspeed Chadwick discusses, to Amanda's excellent essay on teaching Plath and Edna O'Brien and using media to construct new literary histories. Finally, and this is important and maybe important to our discussion here, we want to encourage scholars, we wanted in this book to encourage scholars to take up what have been difficult conversations in the history of Plath scholarships, conversations around representations of psychiatric history, you'll hear more about that today, as well as Plath's troubled relationship to ethnic and racialized representations. Our idea here was to open up some topics, and they're open from the first essay, Jonathan Ellis's overview of Plath's reception to the very last essays and to Donaldson's new work on psychiatric disability. With that, Amanda, some ideas about the introduction and some introduction to the contributors.
Thank you so much, Anita. It's been a real honor working with you for over 15 years and knowing you for over 20. I wrote more about that. Thank you to the Plath Society. We might repeat each other a little bit, but thank you for the Plath Society for hosting us, to Dorka and to Julie. I was really honored to be Julie's external examiner, even though I didn't know until 30 minutes before that I was running the whole thing. So it was a great surprise. And I really enjoyed getting to know Julie's work and getting to know Dorka's work. And they both have new articles out in a special Plath issue that's online. So I encourage you to check them out. Thank you to Anita and to Maeve O'Brien. Thank you, and I'll talk more about that. Thank you to Bloomsbury Academic, who were amazing to work with, particularly Ben Doyle and Laura Cope. Thank you to Donald Cheney, my former professor, who's in the cover photograph, and he let us use it for the cover, which it had never been circulated before, and he always thought it wasn't a good picture, but I think it's a great picture, and Plath is so animated in it. Thank you to Smith College and the Smith College Special Collections, and to New York Institute of Technology for their support along the way. While preparing for this event, I revisited the groundbreaking work of Christina Britsolakis, who passed away a little over a month ago. I wanted to begin by honoring her contribution to Plath scholarship and its long-standing impact on literary criticism. Sylvia Plath and the Theater of Mourning begins, and this is the opening passage of the book. During the final stages of this book's completion, while engaged in the process of obtaining permission to quote from Plath's works, I had a nightmare in which I masterminded the theft of a box containing Sylvia Plath's mortal remains from a neighboring house. No sooner had the box been stored in my cellar, of course, than I had to go into hiding, living in fear of retribution and national exposure for my terrible crime. This lurid dream narrative suggests almost too blatantly the extent to which the act of writing about Plath's work is overshadowed, not only by the manner of her dying, but also by the ethical controversy over the posthumous control of her legacy. From the outset, her writing has tended to entangle its critics in a Gothic loop of questions of death, mourning, legacy, and atonement. Britsolakis' meditation speaks to the gravity of studying Plath's poetry and prose. So much of this sentiment remains. But the contents of the Bloomsbury Handbook to Sylvia Plath also reflect how much has changed, as Anita's introduction to the volume demonstrates. Britsolakis' book, Sylvia Plath and the Theater of Mourning, came out in 1999, before the publication of the Unabridged Journals, edited by Karen V. Kukil, who I'm so excited is here today, which shaped a new generation of Plath scholarship. Since 2 volumes of Plath's letters, edited by Peter K. Steinberg and Kukil, have been published, as well as Heather Clark's magisterial biography, Red Comet. The Bloomsbury Handbook reflects just how integral these resources have already been in considerations of Plath's life and work. And more publications will follow, including Peter's edition of Plath's prose in the fall of 2024, and the poems of Sylvia Plath, edited by Karen and myself in the spring of 2025, both from Faber. I will also be sharing in the chat, though I was having a little trouble doing this, so I was starting to email it to Dorka. I will also be sharing in the chat a call for papers from Julie Goodspeed Chadwick, who is co-editing an exciting new volume, The Rutledge Companion to Sylvia Plath, which I encourage many of you, if you'd like to send a proposal, with Janet Badia and Emily Van Dyne. Julie and Janet also have excellent chapters in the Bloomsbury Handbook, and many of our other contributors are here too. Hi, Catherine Rankovic and Di Bedeau, and I'm also excited to see Christina Zimbakova, who I met over 22 years ago at the original Plath conference. The contents of the Bloomsbury Handbook will reflect a wealth of new approaches to Plath's career, ranging from disability studies and children's literature to fashion, food, and media. I knew that Anita and I would be on the same page with that. The chapters signal Plath's vital role in emerging critical conversations surrounding topics from pedagogy and poetics to considerations of literary history and archival studies. I want to thank my co-editor again, Anita, with whom I have collaborated for over 15 years and known for over 20. Anita's insight and brilliance led us through this project and the pandemic. Our visionary co-editor, Maeve O'Brien, could not attend today. Some of you remember her inspiring Belfast conference. And in fact, I met a lot of you there, including Catherine Robinson. I was thinking that's when we first met. And the Belfast conference provided the origin for many of the essays in this collection. Maeve's chapter is a vital contribution to discourse about Plath, race, and whiteness, and her inspiring activist work continues today, because she's off being an activist. With Anita and Maeve, I would like to thank our presenters, incredible scholars who've all contributed outstanding chapters to the volume. I'm grateful to have worked with each in different capacities. Elizabeth is my colleague at New York Tech for 8 years. Catherine, whose graduate career I've been eagerly following, especially on her visits to Northampton. And Peter, whom I met on the bus to Bloomington 22 years ago, a day or so before meeting Anita at the 2002 Plath Conference at Indiana University, and whose work has had an immeasurable impact on Plath scholarship and literary study in general. So now I'll introduce each of the presenters. I put them in alphabetical order, so then we'll just stick with that if that's okay. Elizabeth J. Donaldson is a school director in the College of Integrative Sciences and Arts on the Polytech campus at Arizona State University. She has published essays on LSD-inspired disability, immersion experiences of schizophrenia, mental illness in graphic medicine and comics, anti-psychiatry in Lawrence Slater's memoirs, and physiognomy and madness in Jane Eyre. Her edited books include The Mad Woman and the Blind Man, Jane Eyre, Discourse and Disability, and Literatures of Madness, Disability Studies and Mental Health. Seen here. She is one of the editors of the forthcoming collection Neurofutures from MLA Press. Catherine Robinson is currently a PhD candidate at Cambridge University, where she is studying the influence of early Welsh literature on the poetry of Ted Hughes. Her poetry, fiction, and essays have appeared in journals such as the London Magazine, the Kenyon Review, and the LA Review of Books. Finally, Peter K. Steinberg's most recent book, The Collected Writings of Assia Wevel, co-edited with Julie Goodspeed Chadwick, won the Popular Culture Association's Susan Koppelman Award for the Best Anthology, Multi-Authored, or Edited Book in Feminist Studies in 2002. His next edited book, The Collected Prose of Sylvia Plath, will be published by Faber on 5 September 2024, which will be a great day. Elizabeth, you can go ahead.
Okay, great. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. I am going without slides today, which is scary for me. My talk is based on my chapter. My chapter is called Psychiatric Disability and Asylum Fiction, From the Snake Pit to the Bell Jar. Despite Sylvia Plath's iconic association with mental illness and the overwhelming body of scholarship that interprets her work through her psychiatric history and diagnoses, disability studies approaches to Plath's work are relatively new and underexplored. In my chapter, which is from a feminist disability studies standpoint, I place Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar and Johnny Panic and the Bible of Dreams within a modern tradition of autobiographically based fiction about psychiatric disability in American literature. The chapter begins with Mary Jane Ward's blockbuster book, The Snake Pit, from 1946, and its companion feature film, which were part of a larger change in the discourse of mental illness in post-war United States. Ward's book and her later advocacy work helped to make the hidden world of asylum life more visible to the public and helped to foster empathy for the experiences of people disabled by mental illness. Furthermore, Ward's narrative established literary conventions of disability, of asylum fiction that are later reflected in Plath's The Bell Jar and Johnny Panic and the Bible of Dreams. As Luke Ferreter notes, the film version of The Snake Pit may be, quote, the most formative influence of all on The Bell Jar, in that it provided the Plath with a narrative framework, not only for her novel, but also for the very experience on which the novel is based, end quote. Reading Ward's and Plath's work together from a feminist disability studies perspective reveals the writer's common concerns and similar strategies for critiquing psychiatric care and describing the inner experience of mental illness. So in this talk today, I'm gonna skip over the Mary Jane Ward stuff, which I highly recommend, but I figure as Plath people, you'd be more interested in the Plath stuff, and I'm just gonna skip right over to Plath. So I'm gonna focus on a close reading of some of the psychiatric disability content in the Bell Jar and Johnny Panic. So a large part of the Bell Jar's appeal to me has always been the narrator's rebellion against the sexual double standards she faces, and how that relates to the psychiatric disability content in the novel, the autobiographically based novel. Esther's boyfriend is Buddy Willard, a medical student who has the good timing to contract tuberculosis just as Esther is about to break up with him. Buddy is a hypocrite in Esther's mind because while she is expected to be a virgin, he has already had sex with a waitress. This sexual double standard is mirrored by a medical double standard that forgives physical illness, but not mental illness. Just as men are allowed to have a sexual history while women are not, physical illnesses allow recovery and acceptance back into the community, while mental illnesses do not. At the end of the novel, when Buddy is recovering from his tuberculosis, but is still too weak to dig his mother's car out of a snowdrift, he has the nerve to ask, "I wonder who will marry you now, Esther?" As Esther notes, Buddy asked this question as if to revenge himself for digging out the car and for my digging out the car and for his having to stand by. In this scene, Buddy fails to perform the quintessential roadside performative masculine act of tending to a disabled car. It's also worth noting that Buddy must borrow a shovel. He doesn't even have the right tool for the job. Moreover, he finds it disturbing to witness Esther's labor and must look off into the distance. The stigma from the mental hospital will stick to Esther's body, but he reminds her here, while looking off into the horizon, the image of a free and limitless future for himself. An important component of Buddy's future is his nascent career as a physician. As Luke Ferreter has convincingly argued, Plath's portrayal of American medicine prefigures the concerns of the women's health movement. For example, when Buddy takes Esther to a teaching hospital to witness a birth, Esther is horrified by the procedure and by the twilight sleep medication that denies women the memory of the pain of childbirth. The birth at the teaching hospital foreshadows the roles Buddy and Esther will play as future physician and future patient, and the gender dynamic of those roles. Esther will also experience the misogynistic practice of psychiatry firsthand from the tone-deaf Dr. Gordon, who can't stop mentioning the pretty girls at her college WAC, Women's Army Corps station, during the war. More significantly, Esther undergoes a traumatic round of shock treatment under Dr. Gordon. This treatment is juxtaposed with the highly effective and humane shock treatment therapy Esther later receives from her female physician, Dr. Nolan, which is often overlooked by readers today. Quote, "All the heat and fear purged itself," Esther explains. "I felt surprisingly at peace. The bell jar hung suspended a few feet above my head. I was open to circulating air." End quote. There's bad shock therapy in the bell jar, and then there's effective shock therapy in the bell jar. Now, this effective treatment isn't without a level of betrayal, if you'll remember. Dr. Nolan had promised to forewarn Esther about the treatment, and she doesn't. Esther does not have full autonomy and does not consent to this treatment in any meaningful way. When she goes for the treatment, she says, well, let's get it over with. She is told that she will have the treatment 3 times a week. When Esther asks how long, Dr. Nolan replies, that depends on you and me. My point is to not idealize or romanticize this version of Esther's ECT. It's definitely problematic, but it is presented as effective in Plath's narrative, and I think that's worth noting. Yet, even as Esther leaves the hospital, she realizes that her cure isn't linear, a one-way process. Quote, how did I know that someday at college, in Europe, somewhere, anywhere, the bell jar with its stifling distortions wouldn't descend again? As she leaves, she is, quote, born twice, patched, retreaded, and approved for the road. This imagery recalls both the teaching hospital and the trapped car, and links gender and disability. Esther's mental disability threatens to be chronic and recursive, but in a scene that recalls a similar exit interview from the snake pit, she has come to the boardroom dressed in her power suit, ready to face the hospital physicians. Quote, my stocking seams were straight, my black shoes cracked but polished, my red wool suit flamboyant as my plans, end quote. These flamboyant plans might remind some readers of Plath's narrator from the short story Johnny Panic and the Bible of Dreams, who has an unwavering commitment to documenting madness. In Johnny Panic, the narrator extends her daytime work of transcribing psychiatric patient interviews for her physician boss and produces a second copy of the same material for herself and her other boss, Johnny Panic, or madness itself, by writing at night. The anti-Bartleby, she won't stop writing. In fact, she is so inspired, she no longer needs an original written source. I am at the point of recreating dreams that are not even written down at all. There's a certain spiritual purity about this kind of doctoring, the narrator of Johnny Panic claims about her office's talk therapy. Yet her workspace is one that is continually subject to the, quote, rude invasions of the other clinics, end quote. There is no physical purity in this crypt Gothic space. Boundaries are always being penetrated, thresholds crossed. Tuesdays and Thursdays, their offices are used for lumbar punctures. In the morning, the nerve clinic patients next door cry for hours. The narrator's quest for privacy in order to read the old record books is impinged upon by the head secretary, Miss Taylor, whose lame left leg announces her arrival. The amputee clinic is around the corner, and the sounds of strangers' peg legs, mistaken for Miss Taylor, cause the narrator anxiety. When the narrator finally succeeds in cocooning herself into the office overnight with the record books, she is discovered by the clinic director, taken through, quote, barren rat tunnels to an all-night elevator run by a one-armed man. I mean, just the disability content here is, right, overwhelming. She's taken by the one-armed man and, quote, up to the observation ward for shock treatment. When she enters this space, presumably she becomes a patient herself, part of the bureaucracy of madness in a new way. Anita Helle's Electroshock Therapy and Plath's Conservative Poetics is an amazing resource for discussion of Plath's work as a medical secretary in the adult psychiatric unit clinic, and for more detailed description of the electronic transcription device. And I'm really indebted here to Helle's work and to the late Christina Britsolakis, who passed very recently, and her work on Plath and Cold War modernism. And I've really relied on both of those sources a lot here in this chapter. And I'm going to finish up right now. The narrator of Johnny Panic is a liminal figure who destabilizes the boundary between psychiatric professional and psychiatric patient. Johnny Panic parodies the study of mental illness and psychoanalysis. The narrator of Johnny Panic meets a rather flamboyant and terrifying end. The 20-story leap, the rope at the throat, the knife at the heart. Yet, in true Plath fashion, this character also has its double or verso liminal figure, the asylum librarian from the bell jar. A former patient, she now works in the asylum. As Esther waits for her exit interview, she thinks about the librarian's life. Glancing at her, myopic, spinsterish, effaced, I wondered how she knew she had graduated at all, and, unlike her clients, was whole and well. For Plath, writing autobiographical fiction about her asylum experiences became a way to know that she had graduated and that she was relatively whole and well. Plath's asylum fiction gave her the vehicle to critique medical and psychiatric care and to point to its complicated, recursive outlines. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Peter or Katrin is next.
I think alphabetically I'm next.
Okay.
All right, can you all see my screen?
Yes, all clear.
Okay, amazing. My chapter in this volume, The Law of Similarity and the Law of Contact, Sylvia Plath, Ted Hughes, and Sympathetic Magic, has its roots in two archival sources. First, while at the Smith College Archive, I looked at Sylvia Plath's edition of James George Fraser's The Golden Bough, and noticed that many of her annotations in it pertained to sympathetic magic and doubles. And Judith Kroll has written much more generally about the influence of sympathetic magic and the Golden Bough in particular on Sylvia Plath. Second, I've spent time in the British Library reading a notebook of folklore that Ted Hughes kept as a teenager and undergraduate. In that notebook, he too was gathering details about sympathetic magic. I became really interested by the parallel early development of this interest in magic. It was an interest Plath and Hughes shared before they met, and that informed their poetic relationship, and that shaped, I think, Hughes's relationship to Plath's poetry after her death. So the way Fraser defines sympathetic magic is like this. If we analyze the principles of thought on which magic is based, they will probably be found to resolve themselves into two. First, that like produces like, or that an effect resembles its cause. And second, that things which have once been in contact with each other continue to act on each other at a distance after the physical contact has been severed. The former principle may be called the law of similarity, the latter, the law of contact or contagion. These types of sympathetic magic, the law of similarity and the law of contact or contagion, can also be seen to describe the relationship between Plath's and Hughes's poetry as it unfolded in this matrix of their shared fascination with magical traditions. Like attracted like, Their shared poetic and occult interests brought Plath and Hughes together into poetic collaboration. Once in contact with Plath's poetry, Hughes's poetry continued to replicate Plath's poems after her death. Many of the titles of birthday letter poems are doubles of sorts for Plath's poems. And in Ariel's Gift, Erica Wagner has written more generally about that relationship between those poems. Plath first read The Golden Bough at Smith College as part of her research for her senior honors thesis, The Magic Mirror, a study of the double in 2 of Dostoevsky's novels. Her mother had given it to her as a Christmas gift, and she wrote to her mother, "Right now, it seems as it is impossible that I ever have a thoughtful, well-written thesis done, because now all reading is apparently unrelated, except that it is all about doubles. And your book gift, The Golden Bough, comes in handy, as it has an excellent chapter on the soul as shadow and reflection." So now I'll go through some of her annotations in that chapter. In that chapter, she underlined Fraser's explanation that in many cultures, a person frequently regards his shadow or reflection or as his soul, or at all events, as a vital part of himself. Plath underlined, too, the logical and perilous extension of that belief about shadows. For if it is trampled upon or struck, he will feel the injury as if it were done to his person. On the next page, she underlined an iteration of the same idea. Injury done to the shadow is felt by the person or animal as if it were done to his body. On that same page, Plath made a note in the margin equating mirrors or water images to people's souls, and she wrote another margin note comparing portraits to souls. And because these are unpublished, I'll just be using paraphrase for some of these archival notes. So now switching to Hughes's folklore notebook, this is a really, really fascinating document, and I'd like to thank my supervisor, Mark Wormold, for pointing it out to me because I wouldn't have found it on my own. But it's a notebook in which Hughes records various bits of folklore starting when he was a teenager and going up through his time as an undergraduate at Cambridge and keeps going for a couple of years after that. These notes are unlabeled. He never includes his sources. However, comparing his notes to the language of the Golden Bough, I have determined that that is the source for several of his early notes about sympathetic magic. This is exciting because we know that Hughes owned the Golden Bough. It's in his library at Emory, but we didn't know when he read it. The notebook shows that he read it shortly before his first term at Pembroke College, Cambridge, either during grammar school or perhaps during his national service. So, and again, relying on paraphrase here, Hughes's folklore notebook states that burning the image of someone in their path will cause their soul to burn. And the Golden Bough, Fraser writes, the Peruvian Indians molded images of fat mixed with grain to imitate the person whom they disliked or feared, and then burned the effigy on the road where the intended victim was to pass. This they called burning his soul. And in Hughes's original diction, the similarities are even more striking. And then Hughes has collected some other pieces of lore about sympathetic magic. He notes that seal skins ruffle when the tide ebbs. And the Golden Bough includes a really beautiful sentence. The skins of seals, even after they had been parted from their bodies, remained in secret sympathy with the sea and were observed to ruffle when the tide was on the ebb. So this is the law of contact, that two things once in contact remain so. Hughes also notes that eating nightingales will cause insomnia. So if you're looking to get a good night's sleep tonight, don't eat any nightingales. And the Golden Bough notes that the ancient Greeks thought that to eat the flesh of a nightingale would prevent a man from sleeping. And that's the law of like attracts like, in the sense that if a nightingale is awake singing all night and we take that into our body, we too will be sleepless. So onto the poetry now. The early Plath poem that most powerfully makes use of her research about sympathetic magic is The Lady in the Earthenware Head, which was inspired by a clay model of Plath's head sculpted by her Smith classmate, Mary Durr. And if you're curious what this looks like, Amanda Golden includes a photograph of it in her book, Annotating Modernism, and also writes about that head a little bit in that book as well. So I encourage you to look that up. The poem's speaker no longer wants this sculpture, which is, quote, spite set, end quote, and fit nowhere, end quote. But the speaker can't decide what to do with it, fearing that whatever befalls it may befall her. She can't throw it into a rubbish heap because she's afraid that rough boys might well seize this prize, maltreat the hostage head in shocking wise, and waken the sly nerve up that knits to each original its coarse copy. So I think in those lines, we can see the echoes of her reading in The Golden Bough about how images are reflections of the soul, and what is done to one will happen to the other. So the speaker resolves to lodge the mimic head in a crotched willow, where it will sort of decay naturally. But at the end of the poem, the speaker winds up leaving the head on the bookshelf. Ted Hughes's Birthday Letters poem, The Earthenware Head, makes the occult implications of Plath's poem more explicit. It serves as both a double for Plath's poem and as an editorial excavation of her learned poetic process which underlay her own poem. Hughes's poem describes carrying the head out into Grantchester Meadows in Cambridge and placing it in a willow tree. And thanks to Diabetto for identifying which willow tree we think this was in her research about Plath and Hughes in Cambridge. So Hughes writes, a twiggy crotch, nearly an owl's porch, made a mythic shrine for your double. You ransacked the source in your poem about it, veiling its mirror, rhyming yourself into safety. So you can see the poems very closely mirror each other, both in the title and in their language. Plath describes a crotched willow. In Hughes's poem, that becomes a twiggy crotch, which I think makes the implicit metaphor of birth or rebirth much more biological and much more explicit. We see this head crowning out of the crotch of this willow tree. It's this moment of very biological birth. He uses the word double, which Plath eschews in her poem, and that harks back to Plath's thesis about the double in Dostoevsky. He describes Plath ransacking her thesaurus in her poem about the head, veiling its mirror, which of course evokes the Golden Bough, and that's one of the ideas in the Golden Bough that Plath specifically made an annotation about in the margin. So this poem really makes explicit both the occult fears and also the occult knowledge that fueled Plath's poem. And Langdon Hammer writes a bit more about the relationship between these two poems in Plath's lives, poetry, professionalism, and the cultures of the school, as does Erica Wagner in Ariel's Gift. The current of sympathetic magic running through Plath's and Hughes's poetry reaches its highest voltage in Plath's Ariel poem, Daddy, in which she describes making a model for the father figure. I made a model of you, a man in black with a Mein Kampf look and a love of the rack and the screw, and I said, I do, I do. It echoes Plath's own earlier poem about Hughes, Man in Black, from 1959. Hughes's own poem, Hughes's birthday letter poem, Black Coat, responds to this perceived conjoining of him and Otto Plath via the magic of contagion, and also responds to and serves as a kind of double for Plath's earlier poem, A Man in Black. We don't have time to discuss those poems and all of their uses of sympathetic magic, but the Bloomsbury Handbook to Sylvia Plath is now available in paperback. So if you want to read more, you can do so there. With many thanks to Anita Helle, Amanda Golden, and Maeve O'Brien for such sensitive and thoughtful editing.
Thank you, Gretchen.
All right, can everybody see that fine? Yeah. Thank you, Amanda, Anita, and Maeve for printing my essay. They will come asking for our letters in the Bloomsbury Handbook to Sylvia Plath. And thank you for asking me to present today. And I'd also like to express my deepest gratitude to the Plath Society for hosting. The premise for my contribution to the Bloomsbury Handbook to Sylvia Plath was to detail my portion of the editorial process during the 8-year-long project that resulted in the 2 volumes of the Letters of Sylvia Plath. It was developed from my keynote talk at the Sylvia Plath Letters, Words, and Fragments Conference in Belfast in November 2017. The chapter focuses on all aspects of the project, including locating and collecting copies of the letters, assigning authoritative dates, transcribing, proofing and editing, selecting images, arranging copyright clearance, writing captions, and annotating in excess of 1,400 letters to more than 140 correspondents, which were found in north of 50 repositories and in personal collections around the world, from Tel Aviv, Israel, to Victoria, British Columbia. In case you are wondering, there are more than 960,000 words total in these books, and I so desperately wanted to get over 1 million. And the volumes include more than 4,300 footnotes. I also detail in the essay something I consider a crucial aspect of the work, which was the establishment of metadata to acquire and maintain intellectual control over the various pieces of the project, from the letters to themselves to supporting documentation. I don't mean to step on anyone's toes, but I was dissatisfied with Letters Home. Visiting archives starting in May of 1998 was illuminating in that it was possible to read unedited letters and to more than just a few recipients. It never occurred to me that I'd ever be a part of such a project, but it was an honor to do so. I'm grateful to Karen for asking me on to the project and to Frida Hughes for entrusting me with the, at the time, unknown letters from her mother to her father, which largely conclude Volume 1. If you want to know, I'm still looking for letters and have acquired copies of 28 new ones. So the current total count of the known letters of Plath is 1,453. I'm going to talk about two other things. Like the letters, in my first visit to Smith College, I read uncollected short stories. I'm not ashamed to admit that I did not know enough about Plath in 1998 to really realize that not all of her stories were printed. In 1979, Plath's estate published Johnny Panic and the Bible of Dreams, which assembled 23 pieces of short fiction and 4 works of nonfiction, and some journal entries. Please note I used the 1979 edition as it printed 4 additional stories, not in the 1977 first edition. Anyway, removing the journal entries, that's 27 prose works. Dozens of works that Plath published were left out of that book, including the majority of the stories she published in 17 magazine, such as And Summer Will Not Come Again, Den of Lions, The Perfect Setup. Den of Lions won 3rd prize in the magazine short story contest, earning Plath a $100 prize. The Perfect Setup received honorable mention the following year. Here's a breakdown of Plath's prose. She wrote 76 short stories, 53 pieces of nonfiction, and at least 50 press releases during her time on press board at Smith College. She also wrote 8 book reviews. That's a total of 187 works of prose in various genres. Also, there are almost 30 extant prose fragments, works which she created and probably completed, but for which there are only smatterings of pages remaining. There are many more works that Plath wrote that simply do not appear to survive. So compared to what was in Johnny Panic, and including the recently published short story, Mary Ventura and the Ninth Kingdom, according to my Plathematics, that's just 15% of Plath's prose that is widely available in bookstores and in libraries. Working on Plath's prose required a different set of editing practices than was used in editing her letters. The main difference is that in the letters we wanted to interfere as little as possible with Plath's intentions. How she saw fit to write and send it was how they would ideally appear for the readers. This was, of course, modeled from the edition of the journals that Karen edited. Her prose writings, however, were more professional, if you will. These are works written for publication and so need to adhere more to the rules that govern our language. My style for the prose book was, in general, light editing. I wanted everything to be as close as possible to Plath's original manuscripts, typescripts, and periodical appearances. But at the same time, I didn't hesitate to make corrections if mistakes, innocent or otherwise, either slipped in or slipped through or were introduced by various editors along the way. And I'll talk more about the prose book maybe in some other venue later on this year. But today marks, as you know, the 61st anniversary of the publication of Plath's novel, and I would be remiss if I excluded mentioning something about this wonderful novel today. Last summer, Heather Clark asked me to teach Plath's prose at the Arvon Foundation's Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes Summer School. I'm happy to see a couple of the students are here from that course. Hello. I'd never taught before, so in creating a course plan, I was worried about both underplanning and overplanning for the 4 teaching days. Fortunately, I overplanned. I wasn't sure of the level of familiarity that the students had with Plath's prose, particularly the bell jar. So I structured the course with a deep dive introduction and genesis into the novel, discussed the real people and real places Plath used for inspiration for Esther Greenwood's story. As I prepared, I was able to explore a couple of projects I'd long been interested in working on. One was how I think the bell jar was written in such a way that it should be a cinematic masterpiece. This is because, in part, Plath had seen so many films and probably saw a decent number of them that were adapted from books. We all know her mind was sponge-like, and I just feel like the final shape of the novel was heavily influenced by the pictures, as they used to be called. Another of the projects that was the development of what I call a key to the bell jar. In this key, I've taken a passage from the novel, noted the chapter and page from the original Heinemann edition, and identified the origin of the passage in Plath's biography using a variety of sources. It is able to show the chronology of the real events and when they happened as compared to how Plath mixed things up in her book. There are nearly 100 that I've found to date. The most recent one that I found, and I'd like to share with you today, appears in chapter 8, where Esther Greenwood says that Buddy Willard wrote a letter to her saying, "TB is like living with a bomb in your lung. You lie around very quietly hoping it won't go off." I sadistically read all of Richard Norton's letters to Plath over the last couple of months. I don't do it unless you have a strong constitution. Richard Norton did write something close to this in a poem that was part of a letter that he sent on the 27th of January, 1953. I had identified something else that I was really excited about, but I haven't received the archival thing that I wanted to show, so I don't have that available to show off as well, so sorry. Thank you very much for letting me speak today, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Peter. If you have any questions, please raise your hands, or you can write it in the chat if you do not want to talk, and we will read the question out.
Hi, I'd like a question, please.
Okay,
But I'm going to put myself back on again
that's fine.
because it's not nice talking to a blank space, is it? I was typing it away to put it into the chat, but in fact it took too long. just to ask Catherine whether she's worked on the Malangan sculptures in the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology in Downing Street in Cambridge, because I know both Plath and Hughes went there. We know that because Plath, of course, wrote The Dead Deer, All My Dead, what is it? All the Dead Deers. Yes, All the Dead Deers. And it's so similar, that the culture of it is so similar to what you were saying about sympathetic magic. So I commend to the House Suzanne Kukler's essay in The Art of Forgetting, which the Pacific culture builds sculptures of the loved ones and when they die, and that sculpture it takes their place in the tribal village, and eventually it's burnt or sent away somewhere, but it lives the life of the person who's died. It's a bizarre thing, but I couldn't help but think of it when you were talking, Catherine. So I wondered if you'd seen anything of that.
No, I haven't pursued that, but thank you so much. That sounds like a fascinating line of inquiry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Di, what is the name of the museum, the full name of the museum?
It's the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, and it's in Downing Street, just out
Yes.
the back of Pembroke College, where Catherine's
Yes.
studying. And it's where the cask is for All the
Yeah.
Dead Deers.
Yes, got it.
Is that still on display?
Yes, definitely. Yes, yes. It was put back on display after it was taken off, I think, to be.
Yeah, I know.
There
I read.
wasn't enough space or something,
Oh.
was there? Yeah, but now it's back in there now.
Mhm.
And I had much fun with Amanda and Anita, who kept wanting to who couldn't believe that there was such a museum in Downing Street in London. And I kept putting Downing Street, and they were saying, where is this museum in London? And I said, no, it's Downing Street, Cambridge. I don't think it's number 10 Downing Street. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Kitty Coles to Peter. Will the collected prose include the children's stories, and can you speak to how they relate to her fiction for adults?
Thank you for the question, Kitty. It is my intention to include the 2 children's stories in the book. It's being typeset right now, excitingly, so I hope it makes the final cut with the publisher. As to how they relate, I don't really want to talk too much about that sort of thing. I would prefer the reader to make their own judgment on how they relate to her adult prose. I did organize that so that they appeared chronologically alongside of her adult fiction, though, so you can kind of see how she was working on several different types of prose, short story prose writing at the same time. I hope that answers you and doesn't disappoint you.
So Peter, are you saying that you're going to include the whole Faber print published It Doesn't Matter suit in your book?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. That'll be of great importance, I think, because we have a wonderful Lisi in our Bloomsbury Handbook has written a great piece on Plath and children's literature. But what I think has not been done at all is to sort of see how this writing for children was a core part of her storytelling narrative capacity related to poems as well as fiction. That's going to be really exciting.
Thank you.
Anyone has go on.
Peter, when was the book going to be released again? What's the publication date?
The 5th of September in the UK. As far as I know, there's still not a US publisher. So pre-order from Amazon.
Okay. Or my Amazon UK account.
Anyone has any other questions to any of the speakers or the editors?
I'll ask one. Hi.
Yeah.
Catherine, could you tell us a little bit about your larger project?
In terms of my dissertation.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so it's about the influence of early Welsh literature, such as the Mabinogi and the Tale of Taliesin on the poetry of Ted Hughes. So I'm looking at how he sort of incorporated some of these stories into his poems in Crow and in Cave Birds, but without naming them or labeling them. He just took the imagery and incorporated the imagery. And then I'm looking a little bit at kind of what that meant for his larger project. And I'm looking a lot at the way that he was influenced by his father's experiences of World War I and how this early Welsh literature that was written in the shadow of Norman invasions really kind of grappled with massive military loss in a way that was very similar to what Hughes sort of inherited from his father with regards to World War I. So I'm looking at just various aspects of his repurposing of that material and what it meant to him in terms of his broader interests and obsessions and poetic projects.
It'll be a
Just
great
a
book.
comment, Catherine. I think it's so great when a subject that has been around in Plath criticism for generations now, which is the double, is really refreshed by archival research of the kind that you've done. I mean, what you helped me see was that materiality of sympathetic magic that appears in so many directions in Plath's work. And that's a very different idea of the double or of the shadow than we used to get when we just used to talk about Plath and the binary selves and the madwoman in the attic. I mean, I think it's a great example, and I'm glad you read from the Golden Bough of how going to source texts like that can extend and elaborate more abstract insights. I find myself, as I was listening to Catherine's commentary, thinking also about the bell jar and what Elizabeth does with that very last, I don't know if it's in the last sentence or the last paragraph, Elizabeth, you can tell us, where you illuminate the idea of the retreaded car. I think that's a wonderful connection. But there's also in the bell jar a sense of the shadow, and shadow is following, shadows in the suburbs. Almost everything has a shadow in the bell jar. And of course, Plath was particularly not so far from her thesis work on the double that she did earlier in all the research that she did. So I think that idea of the shadow from the Golden Bough, the shadow self can loop back around to other work like the bell jar.
Absolutely.
That's several loops there.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Anita.
I saw a performance of the bell jar in Budapest in Hungary a few years ago. And they're still playing the bell jar sometimes, in which there's only 3 characters in the play. Someone is playing Esther and the woman and the man, and they play all the other, male characters and female characters, which I think is a really interesting read on what Anita was talking about, the double in the bell jar as well, and doubling all those characters.
Right. Amanda or Dorca, do you want to share the CFP from Julie and Emily Van Dyne?
Dorca shared it.
Yeah, I can share
You
it
did share.
again.
I just,
My
where
God.
is it? It's in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a link. Basically, it doesn't let me to share a file attachment, but let me go back and I share it again.
And thank you.
And Amanda, did you want to say anything further about the 2 years farther down the road, supposedly 2026 collected poems?
For 2025 spring.
Oh, it is spring. Okay,
glad that-
2025.
I'm glad that Karen's here, who also has a wonderful essay in the collection about her work curating the Plath collection at Smith. And also, I'm glad to see so many Plath people here today from far and wide, including people whose work I've just become acquainted with, like Deepa Kanya, who's working with Marsha Bryant. It's so exciting to see the generations, as Marsha would say, that it's fabulous. But Marsha has also been a great force in Plath scholarship for 2 decades since her work came out on kitchen appliances and the Ladies' Home Journal. And she has done so much to expand our sense of what we could do. And so I'm glad to have met one of her students who's also working on Plath as well, and here today. And that, you know, the book is out in the world and inspiring new people. So thank you everybody for coming.
If there are no other questions, then I think we can close
Yes.
for today.
I just ordered one of the last 5 copies on Amazon.
I
So
read. They should restock.
you might want to order one before they're gone.
Yes, I know. I looked at that last night also, and they said 1 left, but more on the way. I can assure you with the publication of the paperback being so recent in December, it was released, that Bloomsbury does have more on the
People
way.
have them on their website too.
Yeah,
I'll have mine tomorrow. So yay.
good. Yay. Hope you enjoy it. You can write us a note. See if you hate anything or love anything.
I'm
Give
sure
us a
I'll
good
love it
rating on
all.
Goodreads.
I
And
was
order for the library.
I was one of Peter's students at the Sylvia Plath Summer School, so
Oh, were you?
I was excited when he mentioned that maybe I was trying to see who else on the list was one of the students. I was going through it, but it's always exciting to get more info from Peter. So
I agree. Getting more info from Peter is what every scholar must have emblazoned on their
oh,
forehead.
I love his
tonight.
classes. We had every day. We had a couple hours from him, and I just soaked it up. I took so many notes. It was like,
Well, and I should thank Peter as well. In several conversations while we were putting together this collection, and I know with my introduction, he provided some useful thoughts, and there's always a fact or a detail that I know so many of us count on him to know. And that is only going to be a greater bank of knowledge once we have the prose. So thank you, Peter.
Thank you, and you're welcome.
Thank you,
Many more
everyone.
times than I could say.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for the speakers. Thank you for the editors as well, being present. And again, I wanted to just say a word about Christina Brizolatzkis, who recently passed away, and has been a really sad news. And yeah, she made a really great contribution to Plath scholarship, and rest in peace. Well, bye everyone. I'm going to close this meeting, and the recording will be available probably next week. I will probably upload it on YouTube or something and post about it. If you have any questions, you can email to the Society's email address. Thank you again for coming.
Thanks for the posting.
Thank you, Dorca.
so much.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy
Happy
New
New
Year.
Year.
Happy January 14th.
Happy
Bye,
January.
Georgie. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.